All right, well, let's lighten things. I guess I can't even say lighten things up. It depends on, I don't even know how this conversation is going to go. But our third story today, actor Ryan Reynolds, he's married to actress Blake Lively. He says they are deeply sorry. They feel sorry for getting married on a slave plantation, a former slave plantation in South Carolina. In part, he said they are deeply sorry, and quote, "What we saw at the time was a wedding venue on Pinterest. What we saw after was a place built upon devastating tragedy." It was in 2012, not too long ago. I see these things, and I see these things all the time. Unfortunately, like, this was a celebrity couple, right? But a lot of people, plantations are big poppin' wedding venues. And it's wild because they also are, not to mention, like, they have a history of rape, other violence, murder, people in chains. They're also, like, often slave grave sites. I don't want to go to a wedding there. I don't want to go to a party there. Of course I don't want to get married there, but people do. My question, Vince, I'll start with you. I don't know, like, do you believe that you can visit a plantation and maybe, like, in this day and age, not know what it means?
You want to go?
Either one. Because
I just say I don't think it's necessary you don't know what it means. I think that, and this is where I think we go wrong as a society. And I hate to take it here for a second. This is where I think we go wrong in general. Is we tell people how they should feel. We tell people what should be okay and what should not. And that's not fair. And it's not right. You, every day, you have discernment of your own. You have convictions of your own. You make decisions for yourself. And, I could see that to say this was an old whatever land. It's probably gone through several hands from here, whatever. It's a big, beautiful house, some big, beautiful land. And, and some anti-slavery people. So my point is, right now, it could be in a completely different condition, whatever. I think that's up to them, and they should not be villainized for it. And I think it was silly for him to apologize for it. What are you apologizing for? I think that's somebody's preference. I think, and what I care about is if he called somebody the N-word while standing in line. What I care about is if he has a Black person at interviews, but he doesn't hire him because he's Black. That's what I care about. I don't care that he had his wedding at a slave plantation. And I think that's the problem. We tell people how they're supposed to think and how things are supposed to look when it comes out versus focusing on what's on the inside. Because the thing is, you can be well taught, and that's the problem we have. That's why you have people hiding behind white sheets and they're the CEOs and all these things, because people can be well taught based on all of our criticisms. People can easily learn, oh, that's appropriate. Oh, that's not appropriate. Oh, this is, and so what you end up with is a bunch of actors. And you don't know what's on the inside of people. And I guess some could say, oh, well, that says on the inside they're racist or whatever, and that's somebody's entitled to come to that conclusion. But I think we focus so much on boxing people in by one action or inaction. This person should have spoken up when this happened for this person. Well, heck, you don't know if they were on the phone and they made 10,000 phone calls for him, but they never came out and spoke on it. We have to allow people to be who they are in whatever way that they are. And I just think that I understand what it means. And I agree. I wouldn't want to go to a wedding there. I wouldn't want to have my wedding there. I wouldn't want to go to anything. I don't want to visit one, even for historical purposes. I just don't want to have anything to do with that. But I think that that's part of our problem is in terms of overreaching as to whether or not them doing that was okay or not. When it's not something that's an overt act in the sense of, who they are as people or where their heart is or those things, even though I guess people can make that jump or that leap,
right. No, and I get what you mean. I also do love, and it is always like to remember, like, to try to have like grace with everybody, because like you pointed out, like we all have discernment. We all fail at that often every day. Thank goodness that we are allowed to bounce back from things. I do think overall in this country, there is a lack of seriousness when it comes to issues about anti-Black racism and slavery. And I think that all trickles down into modern day behaviors, because no one would ever get married or even desire to get married at a concentration camp, at a site of former, and even hearing that, like, we know, even as Black people, how horrifying that would be. Like, do you not know anything about the Holocaust? Like, the idea that anybody would want to get married at a former concentration camp is delusional to us. But at a former slave camp,
concentration camp is just the only difference is one is pretty and one isn't.
One's pretty, yeah. And I think that I do wish overall, while I do want to have grace with people and understand that people have different thoughts and beliefs about things, I do wish that what started with slavery and how that affects many of our decisions, whether it come to, our educational institutions, our healthcare system, many different beliefs. I wish that it was taken a little bit more seriously, just overall in society in this country. And I think if it were, that would not be a decision that anybody would make.
Right.
Yeah, I agree with you, Brooke. And yeah, kind of had 2 points on this. Number one, and kind of exactly where, you ended at, Brooke, was I think because we've never truly reconciled with our slavery past, and we have not dedicated sacred and hallowed grounds to where, this is a dedicated site, museum, maybe even like made sure the bodies were preserved correctly, just doing the humane thing, which I sort of see a theme here of things, even with the lady antebellum changing her name and how the antebellum has been so romanticized and for non-Blacks pretty much. And so when I read the story, I actually wrote down, why was this article a story? Why was it newsworthy? Because I actually, again, I went deeper because I know that I like Ryan Reynolds.
We love a research king.
So I had to go.
I know, right? Yeah. I'm over here like, tell me more.
Because I was so curious. Half the article was them apologizing for something that happened in 2012, and he made this comment: "It's impossible to reconcile." He said, "Well, we saw the time was a wedding venue on Pinterest and all other stuff." And I was thinking, like, what was else going on in 2012? So I looked and couldn't find anything. But then I kind of dug into another article that talked about this, and I'm sorry, the actual Fast Company article that this was actually built off of, where he was kind of exposed, or he had to talk about or whatever. And I found that they've actually done a lot of other stuff, such as working with the NAACP Defense Fund. They've donated a bunch of money, and they've actually been doing a lot of work, and they made it a point to teach their kids everything. Like, I read some article, or I think it might have been the Fast Company, where they wanted to make sure their kids was raised, and that they made a point to make sure their kids knew that they made a mistake and that they were working to get better and do those things. But as I was going through it, I started to come to this conversation about white fragility again, because at some point it mentioned that he doesn't feel comfortable talking about it because he doesn't want, because sometimes white people can talk about race and get drowned out other voices and all that. And I was thinking, here we go again with this same white fragility thing. White people are always so afraid to talk about race. They're always so afraid to admit their mistakes. They're always afraid to get labeled as a racist. And it's kind of irritating, because I feel like I'm not going to get to the point where I'm going to, pacify white people when they start acting that way. But I get a little worried when people go so far. Like, I kept trying to figure out, why was this such a big deal to Ryan and to Blake? And I get that was maybe their own awakening, that they needed to jump into but man, I was thinking, can we find not from this article, but I'm thinking, like, Ryan Reynolds, this should not have been an article, because it's not that big a deal. I love that he's grown and evolved from that. I wish they'd have spent like 70% article talking about what he does, his companies, what they've done with their children and what learns they've done, versus them talking about them getting wedding. And by the way, this is what made me so white fragility jumped out, because I read somewhere that they were so distressed by what they found out, that they got married on plantation. They got married again at their own house like a couple years later, just so they could feel better. Like, I don't want white people to worry. That's not what I want you to worry about. I want you to worry about, are you making sure Black people look like me are getting jobs? Are you making sure you stand up for them when we're not in their rooms? Are you making sure you're creating opportunities for us? Like, I don't want this to be these answers. Like, I excuse me for getting so emotional, but
no, I respect it.
Post 1965, where we did such a great job as a people and we got the country paying attention, but then we got shitted on, and we got these lazy ass and crappy fixes. And this is an example of just a lazy, and this is not toward them, but just in general, of we need bigger and better things. And this is not going to change my opinion about them one way or the other. I will say I love what they did outside of that, but come on, we cannot let them run with this narrative anymore. They got to do much, much harder work and more.
I don't mind this being a story at all. And I think that's not necessarily need to be a story, but I think it goes to show the amount of disrespect and how overlooked we are. And for them to care that much, and for this to actually be a story with them, and then for them to actually care that much, it kind of brings to me light that people get married on plantations. And other, white people who may care or may not have even thought like, hey, that's offensive, I think this article will help that be on their mind to help stop a lot of the disrespect that we get. Because, this plantation shouldn't really be there in the first place. Maybe as a historical site that nobody goes on because there's a bunch of dead bodies there kind of thing. Or because, it represents, like Brooke said, you don't get married in a concentration camp. Like, nobody gets married at Auschwitz. So I think that even like the smallest speck, because this is wild disrespect at the end of the day. So even the smallest speck of disrespect needs to be addressed, because the smallest disrespect being addressed, that means you can't get away with the bigger things. You can't get away with the things that you guys are saying that are more important, because we're respected on even the smallest level. We're thought about even on things that might not make change, but show respect. Show that, like, why would I do that? That means, I have Black friends. My Black friends would be offended. Like, I don't like what happened to them. Why would I get married there? But things like that just aren't even, as you can see, on the most, this guy donates to the NAACP, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And these things still aren't on his mind. And so these things do need to be on, I don't want to say just white people, it needs to be on everybody's mind. Anybody who would get married. Plantations, they do look nice. The houses are beautiful. I like architecture. The landscaping is nice or whatever. But people, if the respect was there, then it wouldn't cross anybody's mind to ever get married there or ever see it as anything that could possibly be okay for any reason other than a historical site or something along those lines. Not something like, hey, we're going to spend the rest of our life together. Let's commemorate it at a place where, basically a Black concentration camp.
I think we can walk and chew gum. I think that's something too, like, that I think is brought up a lot, like, especially now, when like little ridiculous things are happening. So it's like, they paint Black Lives Matter. And that is frustrating when what you're asking for is a deeper look at police brutality, right? So things like that, absolutely. But being thankful that a celebrity donates to the NAACP and also wanting them to not glorify a place that as celebratory, a place that, its only function was to harm Black people, and make money off of those harms. But I don't know. I wish that we could get there. The Knot, which is like a wedding planning site, Pinterest, they have taken plantations off of their like wedding venue list, which totally seems like such a small thing, but not necessarily an unnecessary thing. I don't see. I would like all of the things that we find out as adults, and I say this a lot, that are rooted in slavery or like anti-Black racism. All of the little things. I would like my kids to grow up and that not be normal to them.
Well, I would love that.
Well,
I just have a thought or a question, and I'm just playing devil's advocate a little bit here. Let's say, for argument's sake, they took one of these plantations and they plowed it to the ground and they built a mall there. Are we the same offended if people go to the mall there? Because
no, not at all. If they raised it and built a mall there, would you build your mall there? Probably
I wouldn't, but I'm asking. I guess what I'm trying to say is,
no, I don't think we would.
The only reason I'm asking is because I think that when we start making arguments like doing it there is disrespectful of those things, that's so subjective. And I think that if you probably polled 500 people of different races and ethnicities, I bet across the board, they would be split about whether or not that was disrespectful. And I mean that even for the group of Black people. I could probably go find you a whole bunch of Memphians who be like, that doesn't bother me, and of course, here in this platform, you all are very aware, you all are very, on top of what's going on, you're informed. Right. You see what I'm saying? You're informed, you have an understanding, you have a deeper thought process and meaning. And I think that when we start fighting or it causes this division over things that are like subjective versus really focusing on more things that we could be intentional and in agreement about. Does that make sense? And I'm not saying that it's like a non-starter, because I absolutely understand OJ's point, of saying, hey, the small things lead to the bigger things. And I don't disagree with that at all. But I think we have to, in general, and when I say we, Black people have to, in general, we have to come to some consensus about, what is offensive to us collectively, or what things that we collectively, want to change and don't want. And I think we can, all agree, of course, on, police brutality and those things. But I just think that
But that's the thing, we don't all agree on that. We don't even all agree on the N-word. That's one of the greatnesses about, I think this show, and why I wanted to have this show, is that we are different. Blackness is not a monolith. And there are things that you and me, Janika, you and me, Vincent, you and me, OJ, think are horrible, that you will find lots of Black people, because white supremacy is so deep rooted in everything that we've learned about life growing up in this country, that you will always find people who are okay with the norm. Yes, there are probably Black people who have gotten married on slave plantations, but everything about, I think that's the issue, is that anti-Black racism should stop being subjective in all forms.
Right.
It should just be, hey, was slavery bad? Okay, let's act like that. Let's act like it does when it's other marginalized communities and the atrocities that they face. Let's stop glorifying really bad things. I think slave plantations existing as a way to go, it's like a bit of a museum, go and see, talk about what happened there. And a lot of them do exist based on that. And then you get a lot of complaints as over the years they've started to actually focus on the slavery and actually call it what it is. You get a ton of complaints from people who don't want to be brought down when they're trying to see this beautiful thing. And people don't even want to be educated about things. Everything about our basic humanity is subjective in this country. It just is, coming from everybody. And I struggle with that.
And I think that goes back to the fact that we've never really reconciled with race, and kind of going back to, I think all of this kind of, if you zoom out, it goes to the fact that we've not reconciled with race and slavery in our country, because using that point about, I think there was a story of someone complaining about the plantation was talking too much about slavery. No one will go to Auschwitz and say, y'all talking about too much about these Jewish people dying. That going back to, we've never reconciled it. And I think until we take it to that level, these things will continue to happen. And I don't know how to fix that. I just think that everything that OJ said, I agree with. Everything Janika, you said, I work with. Everything Brooke, you said, I agree with. I keep coming back to what can we do to address it? Because I don't know if the plantation is a storyline that is important right now on the list of how they treat us,
I respect that. But how are you going to agree with all of us? Now you sound like those people who like big prison sentences but don't like that. No, I'm just joking.
What we're saying is really not also different. And I'll give you, but this is what I mean. And I agree with Vince. I don't know how to fix it, but I think that at some point, yeah, we're not going to all agree all the time, but at some point we're going to have to start reaching some kind of agreements to get any kind of movement forward. And I think and I actually think you can agree with all points, because I agree with what OJ said, and I actually agree with what you said too. You made some great points. And I think that what you said was absolutely true, that our country is just so deeply rooted in white supremacy that a lot of things are just the norm and a change of the way we think as a whole. And some people are just a lot, further along with that mind change than others. But, like one example I can give you just happened here in Memphis, Flight, the restaurant we used to love to go to.
Yeah.
So Flight, Coastal, it's like 4 different restaurants owned by the same people. And it came out that the owner, one of the main owners, was just extremely racist and had like blatantly said, he didn't want Black people working at his restaurants.
One of the blackest cities
even told,
ever.
right. And he wanted them to not seat Black people at the door. When people walk by downtown, he asked that they seat Black people upstairs. And just also that he was, misogynist as well. But the long and short of it is, people protested for a little while and those things. And I still have not stepped back foot in the restaurant. And this happened a little bit over a month ago. But the fact of the matter is, so many people here, my friends and so many Black people were like, well, I'm still going. They always treat me well at Flight. So I'm still going to go. And so, of course, that caused a big rift between us because I'm like, how? Why? When these people won't hire your child, or if someone comes in that doesn't have your status or that doesn't look, like they have money like you do, how are they going to treat your kid when your kid comes in here? And I'm just like, you're still supporting a culture that doesn't want you,
Right.
And it doesn't matter that they may have hired a person or two, who's has some good character and treats you well. That's not indicative of the culture of that place. And so I say that to say, I think as long as we're still divided, and I said that to say to piggyback a little bit off of OJ's point, and I agree, because that's the point that I made. If we're not in agreement on little things like this, like where someone has outright, flat out said, not where we have to draw any conclusion,
Right.
This person has said, they had his former GMs came out and said, these stories are true. This is factual. And these are people who had a lot to lose. And they finally ended up, buying him out or something. But, you walk past, it's still not a Black person. It's not a Black server there. It's still not a Black hostess there. Still not a Black bartender there, at any of the restaurants. And so it just brings you to this thing of, but yet and still when you pass by, it's still packed with Black people.
I think it's the base level problem is respect. Because if they had just basic respect, we wouldn't have these problems because they respect each other. They respect other people or they respect whomever, but they respect us the least. And I mean, it's evident by, they kill us on camera. They don't think about getting married at a plantation. It's the littlest every step of the way it's just proof of disrespect. Mm-hmm. I honestly think that with the invention or with social media that we can get to a place where we do agree on the things that we will say that, we're going to get mad over or demand respect over or establish some kind of baseline because for the first time ever, Black people across the nation get to talk to each other. I see that's a lot of the reason why, Black Lives Matter and all the movements are happening is because we all, for the first time, get to talk to each other. And we know what's going on the East Coast. We know what's going on in the South. We know what's going on here in California. We know what's going on everywhere with Black people everywhere. And so I think over time, if we really want to have these conversations, well, we should really want to have these conversations on what the consensus, everybody's not going to agree, but we can at least get the majority to say that this is what it is. Like Black Lives Matter. The majority says this is what that is. Like there's some people who don't agree, like the guy who lost his knee because he didn't want to take one. You know what I'm saying? Everybody ain't going to agree. What happens to you, but everybody isn't going to agree, and that's fine. But the majority says that Black Lives Matter, right? And so we can also reach the majority on other issues over time. But I think that maybe we need to be conscious that this is a vehicle, social media is a vehicle, that we can talk about these issues and hash them out, because I've seen a lot of things on Twitter over time. You know, the issue evolves into a place where acceptance, everybody is accepted in a space, or an issue is brought to light that nobody ever thought about or considered because said group of people was marginalized. And, you know, like on Twitter, I saw Black LGBTQ lives matter. And, you know, that is something that needs to be on the forefront of everybody's mind when you say Black lives matter, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think that with social media, those kind of issues can be brought into the forefront. Everybody can talk about them. I mean, I didn't talk about it, but I see that, I didn't think about that before. But yeah, you're right. It's all Black Lives Matter. You know, everybody we all identify as something different or whichever. And, you know, we're all affected differently, but all of our lives matter, not just straight Black men.
There's so much more that I want to, I'm sorry, Adrian.
No, go. I was basically done.
No, I didn't want to interrupt you though. I thought you were done. I'm sorry.
I'm just saying that I think that social media is important in that aspect for the Black community. So like Janika was saying, you know, some of these, and Vincent, like, people think this isn't a storyline, but I think it's about respect. And, you know, on social media, we can talk about those things in the Facebook comments and Twitter comments and maybe Instagram comments, and reach a consensus, and a majority of Black people can come to the same perspective. Not all of us, just a majority that can take action, like when we all agreed that Black Lives Matter and we were going to do something about it.
Again, like, my favorite thing about just kind of this platform is that we get to share our different perspectives. It's not the one Black person sitting at a table talking about news, and there's just like a bigger, better opportunity for you to find someone talking about a subject that completely lines up with how you feel, because we are all different. We move through this world completely different from our white counterparts, but also different from each other based on total different things. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I mean, many different things. So I appreciate you all.